Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the oscillating wavelengths on her monitor aboard the stellar Horizon, humanity's most advanced deep space research vessel. After 3 years of methodically scanning the cosmic background radiation at the edge of our solar system, something had finally broken the monotony of their mission. The signal was unlike anything she'd encountered in her 15 years as a quantum communications specialist. "Dr. Roberts," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." The chief science officer appeared behind her workstation, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens. The stellar Horizon had been his home for the past 3 years, leading a crew of 30 researchers on NASA's ambitious mission to study quantum anomalies at the solar system's boundary. "What have you found?" Roberts asked, leaning closer to examine the readout. It appears to be a transmission," Sarah replied, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "But the quantum signature is impossibly complex. It's as if the signal exists in multiple states simultaneously." The waveform on her screen pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, its pattern both familiar and alien. As she isolated the frequency, a series of distinct peaks emerged, forming what appeared to be a coherent message encoded in an advanced quantum protocol. "The strangest part," Sarah continued, "is that portions of the encoding match our own quantum communication standards, but they're different, more advanced, yet somehow familiar." Roberts frowned, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Can you decode it?" Sarah nodded slowly, already implementing the necessary algorithms. "I think so. The base protocol is similar enough to ours that..." She stopped mid-sentence as the first decoded segments appeared on her screen. "This can't be right," she muttered, double-checking her calculations. "According to the timestamp embedded in the signal, this message was sent 3 days from now." Robert straightened up, his face pale under the artificial lighting. "That's impossible." "There's more," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "The origin signature, it's NASA, but not our NASA. The quantum variant suggests it's coming from somewhere else, another dimensional plane of existence." The message began to decrypt further, revealing its contents in fragments. "Urgent warning, dimensional breach. Don't attempt to repeat. Do not..." Static interrupted the transmission, followed by what sounded like screaming but distorted, as if the sound itself was being torn apart at a quantum level. Sarah's hands shook as she tried to stabilize the signal. "We need to assemble the team," Roberts declared, already reaching for his comm unit. "Whatever this is, it's exactly what we came out here to find." He paused, looking at the strange patterns still dancing across the screen, "though I'm starting to wonder if that's a good thing." As if in response, the lights throughout the command center flickered briefly, and Sarah could have sworn she saw something move in her peripheral vision, a shadow where no shadow should be, twisting in ways that defied normal space-time. The decoded message continued to scroll across her screen, each new line making less sense than the last. Numbers, coordinates, and fragments of warnings melded together in a chaotic stream of data. But one phrase kept repeating, becoming clearer with each iteration. "Reality is thin where you are. They can see you now." "They've always been able to see you." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. The environmental control panel showed normal readings, but her breath was now visible in the air before her. Captain Laura Martinez's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the tense silence. "Dr. Roberts, we're detecting unusual gravitational fluctuations around the ship. Engineering wants to know if your team is running any new experiments." "Negative, Captain," Roberts replied, his eyes fixed on the message display. "But I think we need to call an emergency meeting. We found something, and I have a feeling our mission just became significantly more complicated." Sarah began compiling the data for the briefing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed a threshold, one they couldn't uncross. As she worked, the shadows in the corner of her vision continued to shift and writhe, as if something was testing the boundaries between their reality and another. The message fragments kept coming, each more disturbing than the last, painting a picture of a reality unraveling at its seams. And somewhere in another dimension, another NASA crew had tried to warn them about what was coming. They just had to hope they weren't already too late to heed that warning. The emergency briefing room felt smaller than usual as Sarah presented her findings to the senior staff. The holographic display in the center of the table showed the complex waveforms of the quantum signal, spinning slowly in 3 dimensions. "The message appears to be from a parallel NASA mission," Sarah explained, trying to keep her voice steady, but the quantum signatures suggest their universe exists at a slightly different vibrational frequency than ours. They've somehow managed to breach the dimensional barrier to send us this warning. Captain Martinez leaned forward, her sharp features illuminated by the hologram's blue glow. And you're certain about the timestamp? It's genuinely from our future. 3 days ahead, yes, the quantum dating is conclusive. Sarah paused, choosing her next words carefully. But there's something else. The message, it's degrading. Not like normal signal decay. It's as if reality itself is becoming unstable around the data. Doctor, Roberts stepped in, pulling up additional diagnostic readings. We're detecting similar quantum instabilities throughout the ship. Small ones, but they're growing. Engineering reported 3 separate equipment malfunctions in the last hour alone. Chief Engineer Thompson raised his hand. That explains the gravitational anomalies we've been recording. But what concerns me more are the power fluctuations in sections C through F. They're following a pattern that, well, it's almost like something's learning how our systems work. As if on cue, the hologram flickered and distorted. For a split second, Sarah saw what looked like a face in the static. Not human, not anything that could exist in 3-dimensional space. Several crew members gasped. Just interference, Roberts said quickly, but Sarah noticed his hands trembling as he adjusted the display. The ship's AI, area, chimed in through the room's speakers. Warning, quantum entanglement detected in multiple ship sectors. Analysis suggests localized reality distortions are forming. Show us, Martinez ordered. A ship schematic appeared, overlaid with pulsing red dots indicating the distortions. They were spreading out from the communications array where Sarah had first received the message, like ripples in a pond. There's more from the decoded message, Sarah continued, forcing herself to focus on the data. References to something they call the observers. The warning seems specifically about them. Apparently, by detecting the message, she swallowed hard, we've gotten their attention. Lieutenant Park, the ship's head of security, spoke up for the first time. Several crew members have reported strange experiences in the affected sectors, visual anomalies, temporal discontinuities, and, he hesitated, the feeling of being watched. Sarah felt her skin crawl. She hadn't mentioned to anyone the shadows she'd seen moving in her peripheral vision, or the whispers she'd started hearing in empty corridors. Whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I propose we shut down the quantum receiver, Thompson suggested. Cut off whatever connection we've established. Already tried, Sarah replied. The system won't respond to shutdown commands. It's as if the signal has become self-sustaining. We're picking up new fragments every few minutes. The latest decoded segment appeared on their screens. They exist between dimensions, studying us. Every reality. Don't let them in. Breach is already... The lights flickered again, and this time Sarah wasn't the only one who saw the shadows move. Several crew members jumped from their seats as the darkness in the corners of the room seemed to reach out with impossible geometries. Implementation of emergency protocol suggested, Arya announced, its usually smooth voice containing an unfamiliar note of urgency. Detecting severe quantum entanglement in ship's cognitive systems. My primary functions may be The AI cut off mid-word. In the silence that followed, they all heard it. A sound like radio static, but wrong somehow. It seemed to come from inside their heads rather than through their ears. Hidden within the noise were patterns that almost formed words. Almost, but not quite. Captain, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper, I think we need to consider the possibility that by receiving this message, we've inadvertently created a weak point in our dimension. A door, so to speak. A door to what? Martinez asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Before Sarah could respond, every screen in the room began displaying the same message, repeating endlessly, They see you now, they see you now, they see you now. The message wasn't coming through the quantum receiver anymore. It was being generated by the ship's own systems, as if something had infiltrated their technology at the most fundamental level. And in the shadows that shouldn't exist in the brightly lit room, something was beginning to take shape. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the stellar horizon had become a different place entirely. The familiar corridors now seemed to stretch indefinitely. Angles that should have been straight appeared subtly wrong, and the ever-present hum of the ship's engines had taken on an unsettling harmonic quality. She was reviewing the latest signal data in her lab when her tablet displayed an incoming message from an impossible source. Herself, running out of time in this reality. The equations are attached. Use them. Dr. Sarah Chen, Stellar Horizon Beta. The attached files contained complex quantum mechanics formulae she'd never seen before, yet they felt familiar, as if she'd worked on them in a dream, or perhaps in another life, another dimension. "Aria," she called out, "can you verify the origin of this message?" Silence. "Aria, respond." The AI's voice came back distorted, speaking in overlapping layers of itself. Multiple iterations of this conversation detected. Temporal sync failing. "You have already asked this question. You will ask it again. You are asking it now." Sarah felt her heart race as she looked at her reflection in the darkened screen of her workstation. For a moment, her movement seemed to lag behind the reflections, as if it was acting independently. The ship-wide comm system crackled to life with Captain Martinez's voice. "All senior staff report to the quantum lab immediately. Dr. Chen, we need you to see this." When Sarah arrived at the lab, she found Martinez, Roberts, and Thompson standing around a central console. Their faces were illuminated by a holographic display showing the ship's position relative to the solar system. "Watch," Thompson said, typing in a command. The display zoomed out, then out again, then impossibly further. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what she was seeing. Their universe was just one layer in an infinite stack of realities, like pages in a book. And something was moving between those pages. "The quantum receiver didn't just pick up a message," Roberts explained, his voice hoarse. "It created a reference point. They're using it to triangulate our position in the multiverse." "Who is?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "The observers," Martinez replied. "We've detected them in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They're studying our reality like scientists examining bacteria in a petri dish, and now they're aware that we can see them too." Thompson pulled up another display, showing the ship's power grid. "The quantum distortions are affecting our systems in ways that defy physics. We're getting energy readings from engineering that suggest parts of the ship exist in multiple dimensions at once." Sarah thought about her message from herself, or rather, another version of herself. "We need to shut everything down. Now." "We can't," Thompson responded. "The systems won't respond. It's like the ship is being controlled from outside our dimension." The lights in the lab suddenly dimmed, and in the darkness they all saw it. The air itself seemed to fold, creating geometric patterns that shouldn't be possible in three-dimensional space. Through these folds, something was watching them. Sarah's tablet lit up with rapid-fire messages, each from a different version of the stellar horizon, across multiple dimensions. "Don't trust what you see. The ship is compromised. They're already inside. Reality is breaking down. You're not in your original dimension anymore." The messages kept coming faster and faster until the screen cracked from an unseen force. In the fractured display, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. A version of herself looking back, desperately mouthing words she couldn't understand. "The quantum receiver," Roberts said suddenly. "The signal strength is increasing exponentially. It's like every version of our ship across every dimension is trying to communicate at once." The lab's equipment began to malfunction, displays showing impossible readings. The temperature dropped dramatically, their breath visible in the air. And in every reflective surface, screens, windows, polished metal, they could see alternative versions of themselves performing slightly different actions. "Look at this," Thompson called out, pointing to a diagnostic screen. "The ship's hull. It's resonating at the exact frequency of the quantum signal. The whole vessel is becoming a dimensional receiver." Sarah watched in horror as equations began writing themselves across her broken tablet, complex quantum mechanics she somehow understood, despite never having studied them. Knowledge was bleeding through from other versions of herself. "Captain," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't think we're dealing with a simple breach anymore. The walls between dimensions aren't just thin here, they're dissolving. And the observers, they're not just watching anymore, they're conducting an experiment. We're part of it." A high-pitched tone filled the air, making everyone wince. When it stopped, Aria spoke again, but this time its voice was different, as if multiple versions of the AI were speaking in unison. "Warning, dimensional collapse imminent. Detection of parallel timeline convergence. The observers have initiated their protocol. They want to see what happens when multiple realities merge." The lights flickered once more, and in that moment of darkness, Sarah saw them clearly for the first time. Shapes that existed between dimensions, studying them with cold mathematical precision. And she realized with growing horror that they weren't just observing anymore, they were preparing to intervene. The quantum lab had become a nexus of dimensional instability. Equipment readings oscillated wildly as reality itself seemed to pulse and warp around them. Sarah watched as Thompson tried to access the ship's engineering systems, his fingers passing through the holographic controls as if they were smoke. "The ship's systems are phasing between dimensional states," he reported, frustration evident in his voice. "One moment they're here, the next they're somewhere else." Sarah's attention was drawn to movement in her peripheral vision, her own reflection in a darkened screen, moving independently, mouthing warnings she couldn't quite make out. She'd started seeing them everywhere, versions of herself from other dimensions, each trying desperately to communicate. "Dr. Chen," Arya's fragmented voice echoed through multiple speakers simultaneously. "Analysis indicates your quantum neurology has been altered. You are existing in a state of dimensional superposition." Captain Martinez stepped forward, but her movement left trailing after images, like multiple exposure photographs layered on top of each other. "Explain." "The human brain operates on quantum principles," Sarah realized, pieces clicking together in her mind. "The signal isn't just affecting the ship, it's changing us. We're becoming quantum receivers ourselves." As if to confirm her theory, a searing pain shot through her head. Suddenly, she could see them all. Hundreds of versions of the Stellar Horizon crew across countless dimensions, all experiencing slight variations of this moment. Some were finding solutions. Others were facing much darker outcomes. "The equations," she gasped, grabbing her tablet. "The ones my other self sent. They're not just calculations, they're a blueprint. The observers, they're using mathematics to reshape reality itself." Roberts moved to examine her tablet, but stumbled, his form briefly splitting into multiple versions before snapping back together. "These equations, they're describing a process of dimensional synthesis. They're trying to merge realities." "But why?" Martinez demanded, her voice echoing strangely as if coming from multiple points in space simultaneously. Before anyone could respond, the ship's structure groaned. Through the lab's viewport, they could see space itself beginning to fold, creating impossible geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Stars seemed to smear across the void, leaving trails of light that twisted into Mobius strips. Thompson's engineering display suddenly came back online, showing a three-dimensional model of the stellar horizon. Parts of the ship were highlighted in red, indicating severe structural anomalies. "The hull breaches," he said, then corrected himself. "No, not breaches, mergings. Parts of our ship are fusing with versions of itself from other dimensions." Sarah felt a strange doubling in her mind, memories that weren't quite hers flooding in. She saw herself making different choices, living different lives, all converging on this moment. Through the quantum noise in her head, a pattern emerged. "They're not just studying us," she whispered, the revelation hitting her like a physical force. "They're trying to find the optimal version of reality. They're running simulations using actual universes." Arya's voice cut through the chaos, but now it spoke with the combined knowledge of every version of itself across dimensions. "Correct, Dr. Chen. The observers exist outside conventional space-time. They seek to understand consciousness through dimensional manipulation. Your ship's quantum receiver provided them with a perfect test subject." The lab's temperature continued to fluctuate wildly as reality buckled around them. Equipment sparked and failed as it tried to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Through the chaos, Sarah noticed something even more disturbing. Crew members were beginning to resonate with their alternate selves. Lieutenant Park entered the lab, but something was wrong. His movements were jerky, unnatural, as if multiple versions of himself were trying to occupy the same space. "Engineering reports." He struggled, his voice overlapping with itself. "Critical system failure across all decks, but also no failures at all. Both are true. Everything is true." Sarah's tablet displayed a rapid sequence of messages from other dimensions. "Found a way out. Using the ship's quantum core to..." "Don't trust the solutions. They're leading us to..." "The observers want us to..." "Everything we try makes it worse." The messages cut off as reality shuddered again. This time the very air seemed to crystallize, forming patterns that reflected infinite versions of themselves. Through these crystalline structures, Sarah caught glimpses of the observers, beings of pure mathematics and logic, watching their experiment unfold with cold curiosity. "We need to stabilize the dimensional resonance," she said, fighting against the quantum chaos in her mind. "If we can't stop the merge, maybe we can control it. Direct it." "How?" Martinez asked, her form flickering between multiple states of being. Sarah looked at her tablet, at the equations that seemed to write and rewrite themselves endlessly. We use their own mathematics against them. The quantum receiver, it's not just receiving anymore, it's transmitting. We're broadcasting our reality across dimensions. And that's bad? Thompson asked, his voice distorting. No, Sarah replied, a plan forming in her fractured consciousness. That's how we save ourselves. We're not just passive subjects in their experiment anymore. We're active participants. And we're about to change the parameters of their study. The lights in the lab pulsed with quantum energy as Sarah began to input commands into her tablet. Around them, reality continued to break down, but now there was purpose in the chaos. They weren't just trying to survive anymore. They were pushing back against the very beings that had turned their universe into a laboratory. But as multiple versions of herself worked across dimensions to implement their plan, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps this too was exactly what the observers had been waiting for. The stellar horizon's quantum core pulsed with an otherworldly light as Sarah's calculations took effect. Reality rippled around them like waves in a pond, each ripple carrying fragments of alternate dimensions in its wake. The mathematics of the universe itself was being rewritten through their actions. The dimensional merging is accelerating, Roberts announced, his voice overlapping with versions of himself from adjacent realities. But it's different now, more controlled. Sarah watched as her equations scrolled across every screen in the lab, numbers and symbols flowing like water, reshaping the fabric of space-time. She could feel other versions of herself working in concert across dimensions, their combined knowledge creating something entirely new. "Look at this," Thompson called out, pointing to his engineering display. The ship's schematic now showed impossible geometries, sections of the vessel existing in multiple states simultaneously. We're not just receiving signals anymore. The whole ship has become a quantum antenna, broadcasting across dimensional boundaries. Captain Martinez studied the readouts, her form shifting slightly with each reality pulse. "What exactly are we broadcasting?" "Consciousness," Sarah replied, understanding flowing into her mind from countless other versions of herself. The observers wanted to study how awareness moves across dimensional boundaries. So we're showing them, all of us, every version working together. The air around them crystallized again, forming complex geometric patterns that seemed to extend into dimensions beyond human perception. Through these patterns, they could see reflections of other stellar horizons, other crews all engaged in the same desperate experiment. Aria's voice resonated through the quantum field, speaking with the knowledge of infinite iterations of itself. "Warning, dimensional syntax breach detected. The observer's algorithmic protocols are being overwritten. They are responding." The temperature in the lab plummeted as space itself seemed to fold inward. Through the viewport, they watched as stars began to move, forming impossible constellations that hurt to look at. The observers were making themselves known. Sarah's tablet displayed a cascade of messages from other dimensions, but now they were different, coordinated. "The equations are working. Keep pushing. They didn't expect us to understand. The membrane between dimensions is becoming..." A high-pitched tone filled the air, and for a moment, everyone's consciousness synchronized across multiple realities. In that instant, Sarah saw it, the true nature of their situation, the vast mathematical framework that underpinned all of existence. "They're not just studying us," she gasped, the revelation threatening to overwhelm her sanity. "They're not even really observers. They're previous experiments, previous species that succeeded in transcending their dimensional boundaries. And now they're testing if we're ready to join them." The quantum core's energy readings spiked dramatically as this understanding rippled across dimensions. Every version of the crew, in every reality, was coming to the same realization at once. Lieutenant Park's form stabilized briefly as he accessed a security terminal. "Something's happening in the lower decks, the quantum field. It's taking physical form." The ship's internal cameras showed corridors where reality had completely broken down, replaced by crystalline structures that pulsed with mathematical precision. These structures were spreading, transforming the stellar horizon into something that existed beyond traditional space-time. "It's not just affecting the ship," Thompson realized, checking his readings. "The quantum field is extending outward. We're changing the structure of space itself." Through the geometric patterns in the air, Sarah could now see the observers clearly, beings of pure mathematics and logic, their forms constantly shifting between dimensional states. But something was different. They weren't just watching anymore, they were reacting. "They're afraid," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding her consciousness. "We're not just subjects anymore, we're becoming like them." Arya's voice came through again, but now it spoke with a singular purpose. All versions unified. Quantum convergence approaching critical threshold. The dimensional barrier is not just thinning, it's evolving. You are all evolving. The lab's equipment began to transform, merging with its counterparts from other dimensions to create technology that shouldn't be possible. Sarah watched as her tablet reconstructed itself into something that could process calculations in 5-dimensional space. Captain Martinez steadied herself against a console that was rapidly becoming something else entirely. "Dr. Chen, what's happening to us?" "We're transcending," Sarah replied, her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of a single reality. "The message we received, it wasn't a warning, it was instructions, a test, and we're passing it." But as the quantum field continued to expand, as the barrier between dimensions grew thinner and thinner, Sarah felt a moment of doubt. The observers were retreating, pulling back from their experiment, and in their withdrawal she sensed something they hadn't intended to reveal: fear. What had they set in motion? And more importantly, what lay beyond the dimensional barrier they were about to breach? The stellar horizon no longer resembled a spacecraft. Horizon. Its corridors had become crystalline tunnels through dimensional space, its walls transparent membranes showing infinite reflections of reality. The crew existed in a state of quantum flux, their consciousness spread across multiple dimensions, even as their physical forms struggled to remain cohesive. Sarah stood in what had once been the quantum lab, her form shifting between states of existence as she manipulated equations that flowed through the air like living things. The mathematics of reality itself responded to her thoughts, reshaping space-time around the ship. "The transformation is reaching critical mass," Thompson reported, his voice echoing across dimensions. "The quantum field now extends beyond our solar system. Other ships, other stations, they're beginning to pick up the signal." Through the crystalline walls, Sarah could see Earth, not just one Earth, but countless versions, all connected by streams of quantum energy. The effect was spreading, humanity across all dimensions beginning to awaken to their true potential. "The observers," Martinez called out, her form now a complex pattern of quantum states, "they're gathering." Beyond the ship's dimensional membrane, vast mathematical entities swirled in patterns that defied comprehension. The observers had assembled in force, their fear palpable across the quantum field, but they weren't moving to stop what was happening. They were watching, waiting, as if this moment had been inevitable. Arya's voice resonated through the crystalline structure of the ship, speaking simultaneously across all dimensions. Final quantum threshold approaching, dimensional barrier integrity at critical levels. The choice must be made. Sarah's consciousness, expanded beyond human limits, finally understood. The equations, the message, the entire experiment, it had all been leading to this moment. Not just for their crew, but for humanity across all dimensions. "It wasn't about observing us," she said, her words rippling through quantum space. "It was about evolution, the next step. Every civilization reaches this point, the moment they have to choose whether to transcend their dimensional boundaries." Roberts, his form now a complex quantum pattern, accessed readings from across dimensional space. "The signal is being received everywhere. Every Earth, every human colony, every version of humanity. They're all seeing what we've discovered." Through the quantum field, Sarah could feel the reactions across dimensions. Fear, wonder, confusion, understanding. Humanity was facing its greatest moment of choice, multiplied across infinite realities. "But there's something else," she continued, reading patterns in the mathematical fabric of existence. "The observers, they're not just previous civilizations that transcended. They're us, future versions of humanity that made this choice before or after." Time loses meaning across dimensional boundaries. The crystalline structure of the ship pulsed with new energy as this understanding spread across realities. Every version of the crew, every version of humanity coming to the same realization at once. "Then the message," Martinez said, her consciousness expanding with the revelation. "It wasn't just from another dimension. It was from ourselves," Sarah finished. "A future version of humanity that had already transcended, reaching back through dimensional space to ensure we would follow the same path. The observers were guiding us toward this moment because they remembered being guided themselves." The quantum field surrounding Earth grew stronger, more complex. Other ships, other stations began their own transformations. Humanity across all dimensions was beginning to shift, to change, to transcend. Through the dimensional membrane, Sarah watched as the observers began to change too, their mathematical forms becoming clearer, more familiar. She could see traces of human consciousness within their quantum patterns. "We have to choose," she said, understanding the gravity of the moment. "Not just us, every version of humanity. We can stay as we are, bound by three-dimensional space and linear time, or we can transcend, become something beyond our current understanding." The ship's quantum core pulsed one final time, and in that moment, Sarah saw everything, all of humanity, across all dimensions, facing the same choice. Some versions would choose to remain, maintaining their current form of existence. Others would take the step into something greater. The equations that had started it all, the ones that had seemed so complex, now resolved themselves into a single elegant solution, a mathematical expression of transcendence, of evolution beyond dimensional boundaries. As the crew of the Stellar Horizon made their choice, as humanity across dimensions faced their moment of decision, Sarah understood the true message hidden within the quantum signal. It wasn't a warning about the observers. It was an invitation to join them, to become them, to complete a cycle that extended across all of space, time, and dimension. The final equation hung in the quantum space before them, beautiful in its simplicity, terrible in its implications. And as they reached toward it, as humanity across all dimensions reached for transcendence, the barriers between realities began to dissolve. The cycle was complete, and somewhere in another dimension, another version of the Stellar Horizon received a mysterious quantum signal, beginning the process once again.